everyone, welcome back to Maria's Home and Garden. Welcome if this is your first time joining me. Today, I'm going to show you how to dehydrate your sourdough starter. You might ask, why is it necessary to dehydrate my sourdough starter? The reason why you want to dehydrate it is to have a backup. Sometimes life happens and you take a break from feeding it, or you completely forgot about it in the back of the fridge, and once you pull it out and feed it, it's no longer alive, or you're not able to get it to a very active or bubbly stage. This is important for those of us that do not feed or you're not using it on a regular basis. So I typically keep it dormant in the fridge, and sometimes there's long periods between feeding. So if this happens and your sourdough starter is not able to activate after you feed it, then you can actually use your dehydrated sourdough starter to start all over again, but it will definitely save you time compared to starting the entire process of making your own sourdough starter from scratch. On the right side, we have a sourdough starter that even after 8 to 12 hours did not rise at all. This is an instance where I was grateful that I had some dehydrated sourdough starter ready to go. The other reason why dehydrating sourdough starter is important is because you can preserve it for a long time, and now you can easily also share it with others. In case you have not started on your sourdough journey and already have a dehydrated sourdough starter but don't know what to do with it yet, I'm going to be releasing a video on how to hydrate it and know when it is ready to use. So go ahead and subscribe to get notified when that video gets released. So now let's go ahead and get started. To dehydrate a sourdough starter, first we need an active bubbly starter. Let's go ahead and grab our starter from the fridge to feed it. And we're going to get it to the point where we can dehydrate it. If you want an explanation of what is happening with your sourdough starter at this stage, check out this video. Here is our starter. We need a kitchen scale, all-purpose flour and water, and a spatula to mix it. Today, we need 100 grams of starter and about 30 grams to store in the fridge for later use. That gives us a total of 130 grams of active starter that we need, not including the amount that we're planning to dehydrate. This is going to give us a starting point. The ratio that I recommend when you feed your starter is 1 part sourdough starter and a minimum of 2 parts flour and 2 parts water. You can add more flour and water to the starter, but do not go below the minimum that I recommend. Here we have 28 grams of sourdough starter, so we are going to be adding more than 56 grams of flour and more than 56 grams of water. To this starter, let's go ahead and add 180 grams each of flour and water to the starter. We'll dehydrate any of the remaining sourdough starter after removing the amount that we need, which is roughly about 130 grams. You can see that I added a little bit more water than I intended, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more flour as well. Now let's go ahead and mix it. This ensures that there's no dry flour on the bottom or the sides of the jar. Scrape down the sides of the jar to easily see the starting level of the sourdough starter. Cover the sourdough starter with either a coffee filter or a napkin that is going to be secured with the rubber band, or you can also use a lid if your jar has one. This is to prevent it from getting contaminated or things from getting in. So the lid does not have to be tight on the jar. To keep track of the sourdough starter activity as it rises, we're going to go ahead and use some tape and a Sharpie or a rubber band to mark its current level. The goal is to leave it at room temperature until it has at least double above the current level. If you feed it before going to bed, it more than likely will be ready in the morning, or this step usually takes about 8 to 12 hours. In this case, we're going to go ahead and feed it before bed, and we're going to allow it to rise overnight. And you can see now that it has more than doubled already. This is what an active sourdough starter looks like. You can see all of the bubbles on the sides of the jar. And if you look inside the jar, you also see a lot of bubbles inside. Now let's go ahead and mix it to remove all of the bubbles and make it easier to pour. It has dropped back to the initial level that we started with. Let's take out the amount that we need and separate what we're going to dehydrate. We're going to go ahead and save about 1 tablespoon in another jar to save for later in the fridge. Don't forget to label it so that everyone knows exactly what it is and it doesn't get thrown away by accident. This is how much we have to dehydrate. I'm pouring all of the sourdough over the parchment paper. This is definitely too much sourdough for this parchment paper, so we're gonna go ahead and spread it as thin as possible on the parchment paper that we have first, and then any remaining sourdough starter, we're gonna go ahead and spread it on a silicone baking mat. We're going to spread the active dough sour starter. We want to spread it as thin as possible. This will allow it to dry more quickly. We can spread it on a silicone baking mat or use parchment paper. Today we're going to go ahead and use both to see what it looks like using both of these options as it dries. Let's start with the parchment paper. The parchment paper is a bit more difficult to work with because it is very thin and has very little weight to it, so it's lifting as we spread it. One of the ways that you can do it is go ahead and hold a corner of the parchment paper and spread the starter across to the other side. Now, with the remaining sourdough starter, we're going to go ahead and spread it on the silicone baking mat. You can see that it's easier to spread compared to the parchment paper because the silicone mat is heavier and doesn't easily lift as we spread the starter. The thinner you spread the starter, the faster it will dry. Here is what they look like after spreading it very thinly. At this point, we have two options. We can use a dehydrator at the lowest temperature setting, or we can air dry it. Today, we're gonna go ahead and air dry them. After a couple of hours, this is how it's starting to look. The starter is starting to pull away from the silicone baking mat in some areas, but you can see that there's still wet spots. On the parchment paper, you can also see wet spots, but the corners are curling. And You can see that this is happening because the parchment paper is much lighter compared to the silicone baking mat. After allowing it to dry overnight, this is how they look. There is no visible wet spots on either the parchment paper or the silicone baking mat. On the silicone baking mat, you can see that the sourdough starter has formed sheets that flake and have lifted off of the silicone baking mat. And we can easily pick up those large pieces. Let's go ahead and break them up into smaller pieces and transfer them to a plate. On the other hand, on the parchment paper, it looks like a sheet of paper. Let's go ahead and also break it up and transfer it to a plate. The drying time will vary depending on the temperature and humidity in your area. Sometimes it might take longer, or sometimes it might dry faster. When it is ready, it will be completely dry and brittle like a cracker. On the left side, we have the sourdough starter that was dried on the parchment paper, and next to it we have the one that was dried on the silicone baking mat. The one dried on the parchment paper looks thicker compared to the one on the silicone baking mat, but they're essentially the same. Let's go ahead and break it up and get it into a jar to store it for later. You can also use a plastic bag. Once you have your sourdough starter in the jar or a plastic bag, you can store it for a couple months in the pantry. Or if you want to store it for a longer time, you can put it in the fridge or even in the freezer for longer storage. The storage and longevity of it is similar to store-bought instant yeast. It will definitely keep longer when you freeze it. And that is it. This is what it looks like in the jar, and it's ready to be stored. After you either add it to a jar or a plastic bag, make sure to label the content and also date it. In case you already have a dehydrated sourdough starter and don't know what to do with it to start on your sourdough journey, stay tuned because I will be showing you soon how to activate a dehydrated sourdough starter. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when that video gets released. Like this video if you enjoyed it or found it useful, and share with others. Remember, keep watching and don't be afraid to try something new. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.